Very good evening to all of you. So, as a part of fortnightly seminars, in fact, we are going at a very uh, high speed. That not one is happening, but multiple seminars are happening. That's a good thing, I think. And today we have Professor Peter Bihari from Budapest Business School, and his career is, in fact, not just academician, but was former central banker of Hungary. He worked as advisor to governor of Central Bank of Hungary, and is also member of Monetary Policy Committee for more than 7 years. And his area of interest is macro and policy making and development related. In fact, before joining Central Bank, he was visiting various institutions in not only in Hungary, even outside, including Canada and other countries. And in fact, a few years back, he was visiting Gokhale Institute as well. And he spent a few days here, and he was working on development financial institutions in India. And he worked on it, and he published a paper. That time, I think there was a discussion that we need to, in fact, strengthen and re-strengthen our development financial institutions in order to support credit growth in India. So that time, in fact, he was working, and he presented a paper as a part of faculty seminars at that point of time. And beside, we have another central banker, former central banker, Dr. Bajil Sheikh, who also spent the entire life of his career with the Reserve Bank of India at different capacities. And in fact, I requested him to moderate today's session, and he has happily agreed. I thank you for accepting our invitation, sir. And we have our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Ajit Ranade, and he's always supportive to bring people to share their new insights and experiences with our students and faculty. And in fact, the moment I said that, he said, yes, please go ahead. And thank you, sir, for that motivation and support. And I would like to request Dr. Bajil sir to make some introductory remarks about today's topic, that is unconventional policies, which are good or are to be continued for some more time. Our stopping is good for the time being. Sir, please.
Professor Bihari, Madam Bihari, Vice Chancellor Dr. Ranade, and thank you, Dr. Reddy, for the kind introductions. The city of Pune and Hungarian economists have had a long tradition. In 1955, you had Nicholas Kaldor had come up with the summer school, the iconic summer school, in which virtually most Indian economists of standing attended. It was an iconic event. And today, it's a rare privilege to have Dr. Peter Bihari to carry forth this tradition. And he will be addressing us on, are the days of unconventional monetary policies over for good? Now, most of us are familiar with macroeconomics. However, this topic of monetary policy falls within the realm of central banking. For some very strange reason, the theory and practice of central banking retains a certain mystique about it. And you see the comments, the celebrated comments of Ben Bernanke saying that quantitative easing works in practice, but it doesn't work in theory, doesn't really, it goes about to perpetuate this mystique rather than demystify this area. Okay, so we seek your indulgence of everyone just to put this area in quick perspective for a few minutes. When we talk of a central bank, the central bank evokes a certain image in our eyes. The image is that of stability, more specifically about an institution in the quest of monetary stability. And that is the core reason and the rationale for the existence of a central bank itself. The idea is very straightforward, that price stability brings about a security of expectations. It allows for decisions, savings, investments, and consequently of growth and employment. However, at the turn of the millennium, central banks added the mandate of financial stability also to the area of monetary stability, essentially meaning that that they should work towards a resilient system that is resilient to shocks. It should be stable. Too many banks should not fail, etc. Now, unconventional monetary policies, in some ways, have been linked to this expansion of the mandate to financial stability. And it also, the unconventional monetary policies also gave rise to questions whether there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs between monetary policy and financial stability, and we today still live in that question. Going back to price stability, just one more minute over here, is that in a world before central banks, price stability, the 19th century, and especially the classical gold standard era, has been cited as an era of exceptional price stability, where money was linked to gold, and governments could not overissue, and Hume celebrated price specie flow mechanism in short price stability. However, gold imposed constraints on international liquidity, and it was felt that the rules imposed by gold could as well be imposed by institutions such as central banks, and the Brussels Conference of 1920 advocated the establishment of central banks free from political interference as an institutional mechanism to guard against overissue. Now, central banks brought with it the debate between rules versus discretion. And as Keynesian economics gained ascendance, the pendulum swung in favor of the discretion. The monetarists gave a pushback with the pendulum swinging back towards rules, with Milton Friedman making his celebrated statement that central banks should be abolished altogether, and you don't need central banks. And in 2007, the shock of the global financial crisis pushed the pendulum back towards discretion. Now, here central banks used their conventional monetary policies, pushed interest rates towards the lower bound of zero, and it was felt that you needed additional toolkits, and these additional toolkits were in the form of unconventional monetary policy. And what are they? How effective have they been? And what are the intended and unintended consequences of these is an area which we look forward to Professor Bihari taking us through this area. Thank you so much, Professor, and we look forward to your talk.
So when I am part of the audience and I hear a guest speaker saying that I am pleased to come, I always treat this as a phrase of courtesy. But in this case, I really mean it. And it is a pleasure to share my ideas with you. I am coming back after 7 years. I spent a few months at the Gokhale Institute, which was very productive for me. And I'm very grateful to Professor Shiva Reddy to give me this opportunity to talk to you again. And I am very thankful to Rajas Parchuri, who cannot be here today, who opened the door of the Gokhale Institute for me. Before getting to the subject, I want to give you a 1 minute introduction of my country, where I am coming from. Hungary is a small country in the middle of Europe with a population of 10 million, population of Mumbai approximately. Member of the European Union, member of the NATO, but not member of the Eurozone. This is a subject of a big discussion within the country to join as soon as possible, or delay as much as possible the introduction of euro. The second little thing I want to show you is my name. My name Bihari is not from the state of Bihar in India, but this is from the state of Hungary, a province of Hungary, which is called Bihar as well. I did some research of etymology to find out the similarities. the roots, common roots of these two, but nothing. So we do have a province called Bihar, and some of the family names come from regional areas of the country. So now getting to the subject, the agenda of this talk is approximately this: the ineffectiveness of traditional monetary policy tools during a crisis, objectives, size, instruments, workings, effectiveness of asset purchase plans, side effects of asset purchase plans, objectives, workings, effectiveness of forward guidance, side effects, uncertainty of forward guidance, asset purchase programs after the crisis, from quantitative easing to quantitative tightening, forward guidance as an instrument of monetary policy, and some conclusions. The first point I want to make is that traditional monetary policies face a challenge during a crisis. The two main crisis episodes are the great financial crisis of 2007 and 8, and the second is the COVID crisis of 2019 and 20. And during both crises, traditional central bank policies became ineffective. This ineffectiveness had basically two main reasons. One is that market participants had fears from the future, were uncertain about the interest rate environment they were facing in the middle of the crisis. They felt that after recovery, the central banks would increase their interest rates soon. So the risks and the fears produced a high yield expectation. And central banks reacted to the crisis according to their traditional logic by decreasing the interest rate. They wanted to ease monetary conditions. They wanted to provide lower interest rates for lending, and wanted to encourage economic activity by lower interest rates. On the other hand, this high yield expectation did not allow lending rates drop. So therefore, central banks kept cutting rates, and market interest rates still didn't come lower. The second explanation for the ineffectiveness is that the central bank rates quickly reached the zero level, and further easing was not possible. Negative interest rates were not feasible. So therefore, central bank main policy instrument became ineffective. So the lower left-hand case is the interest rate change, which is the main instrument of the central bank. There are other traditional instruments such as reserve rate policies and the interest rate corridor. I would not touch upon those. So interest rate policy became an ineffective tool during the crisis, and from this stalemate situation, the unconventional new measures seem to provide a rescue. Unconventional term is used because the two main instruments of unconventional policies, the asset purchase programs and forward guidance, were not compatible with earlier central bank thinking, principles and practice. In the earlier times, central banks were not very talkative. They didn't communicate too much with the public. They kept their intentions regarding the future interest rate as their secret. And forward guidance meant a direct announcement of the interest rate path of the future. So that was a break with the earlier practice. Second, the asset purchase program made a direct break with the earlier central bank practice. central banks were not supposed to buy government securities. Actually, there was a formal prohibition. Monetary financing of the government was prohibited. And the reason for this was very, very obvious. If central banks were allowed to give a loan to the government, then the government budget deficit would have become limitless, and high budget deficit represent a threat on economic stability. Therefore, governments and central banks together decided that central banks should not finance the government. So this principle was broken during the crisis. I would come back to this because this statement might be controversial for certain eyes. So I am going to spend my time with the two main instruments of unconventional monetary policies, the asset purchase programs and the forward guidance. So the main objective during the crisis time is to lower interest rates in order to stimulate economic activity. And as I said, lowering interest rates through the traditional monetary policy instrument was not possible. So the purpose of the unconventional monetary policy asset purchase program is to lower yields, and the slide tells you how this is supposed to work. Asset purchase program can be called as quantitative easing. Easing the monetary conditions means lowering interest rates, and quantitative, the term quantitative comes from the money supply, increasing the quantity of money in circulation. So therefore, the APP, asset purchase program, and quantitative easing are more or less synonymous. Quantitative easing can be said is a proxy for interest rate policy, and the objective of forward guidance will be the same as the asset purchase program, lowering yields. So the idea of the asset purchase program is that the central bank injects money, pumps money in the system, buys securities from bondholders, mostly commercial banks, and this additional demand for bonds would increase their price, and simultaneously would decrease their yields, and the lower yields would be beneficial for the economic activity. So this is very straightforward, but this is not that it's not that easy. When central bank decides to buy bonds, this actually represents an additional demand, but demand would actually increase only if the sellers of the bond would use the proceeds of their sale to buy new bonds again. Otherwise, there would be only a structural change of the existing demand, and would not affect the yield level that much. So therefore, additional demand would be created only if commercial banks would continue to buy bonds as they did before, and lower yields would normally useful for economic activity. As we learn from textbooks, investments, one of the main factors for investment activity is the interest rate level. If the yields come down, the capital cost for economic activity comes down, so this is an encouragement for economic activity. The other important aspect of asset purchase program is what we call the signaling effect. By buying bonds, the central bank sends a signal to the public that it is committed to bring yields down, and if this signal is well received by the public would change its expectations regarding the future yield movement. I think this second aspect of the asset purchase program is as much important as the first one. You can see on the chart the dramatic increase of central bank assets during the crisis. Asset purchases reached extraordinary proportions, swelled balance sheets of central banks. You can see on the right-hand chart the red circle, that which is the European Central Bank activity. It started only 2015. In Europe, the asset purchase program started that time, not during the great financial crisis. The European Central Bank relied more on liquidity type of rescue programs. We'll be coming back to this chart a bit later. And you can see the size of the central bank balance sheet in percentage of the GDP. You can see that in the US, by 2020, the Fed balance sheet reached, I tell you exactly, 22.4% of the US GDP. And now you can guess what was the percentage before the great financial crisis. Those who think that it was around 15% raise their hands. Those who think it was below 10% should raise their hands. Okay. I can tell you exactly. In 2007, it was between 4 and 5%. So it is more than 4 times higher than it used to be. The potential threat on this huge share of the balance sheet in percentage of the GDP is an inflation threat. You see that there is a tremendous increase of the money supply, and this huge money supply is a potential demand. And if it is spent, this injected money is spent altogether, it would represent a very strong pressure on inflation. Inflation did not occur, and this was because in reality this money injected was not really spent. It was sitting on central bank reserves and also leaked out to other countries, to emerging countries. I don't know if India enjoyed a strong capital inflow at that time, but Hungary did. This huge financial inflow in the country helped a lot to bring yields down in my country as a result of the American asset purchase programs. So the only success criterion of this asset purchase program is whether or not it managed to bring yields down. If yields dropped, then we can qualify that the program was successful. If yields stayed unchanged, then the program was unsuccessful. According to empirical research made by many experts, the conclusion is unanimous. There was a significant drop of yields, a significant drop of yields as a result of the asset purchase programs. We can say that this program, the quantitative easing, prevented an economic catastrophe during the crisis. On the other hand, the final expectation was not met. Yield drop did not lead to a substantial increase of investment and consumption. One can claim and announce that central banks are not omnipotent. They may manage to bring yields down, but they may not manage to encourage economic activity as much as they wanted, because economic activity is a function of many other variables, and those other variables work against the desired outcome. And the reason for this, as I mentioned, that a substantial part of the injected money sit idle on the central bank reserves, and on the other hand leaked out from the advanced economies towards emerging economies. Let me mention some of the side effects of the asset purchase programs. One is diminishing marginal effect. The more programs, more money is spent on buying new assets, the impact on yields is less and less. Second, difficulties of exit. I will come back to this. Once central banks want to get rid of the securities it purchased, it would be a very challenging task, because it would return the yield directions in the opposite way, bringing yields up, and it could represent a threat on the economic activity. I will come back to this later. As I mentioned, the money injection represents a potential source of inflation, which has materialized later after the COVID crisis, 2020, 21, 22. Also, because this injected money was not used for consumption and investment purposes, but was used for financial investment, it produced a bubble on the stock market, on the real estate market. It is hard to claim if there is a bubble. Bubbles are mysterious productions. It is easy to identify them only when they exploded. It is much more difficult to identify them because they are being built. And lastly, moral hazard for governments. This is a controversial issue, as I mentioned, whether or not asset purchase programs represents a violation of the prohibition of monetary financing. Some could argue that government gets new funding when a bond issued, and the primary buyer pays the price of the bond to the government. If a bond is bought on the secondary market, there is no additional funding for the government, and some of the asset purchase programs, or perhaps most of it, was implemented on the secondary market. But some countries did buy bonds from the primary market. Some central banks did buy not only government bonds but corporate bonds, which is not compatible with government mandate. But indirectly, even if the government bond is bought on the secondary market and it helps to bring yields down, indirectly it helps government financing a lot, because it makes cheaper the government financing, and that way encourages higher deficit. It is easier to run higher budget deficit if bond yields are low. So therefore, in my reading of the situation, this asset purchase program does represent a violation of monetary financing prohibition. Central banks face new challenges in 2021 and 22. Inflation surge required monetary tightening. After the COVID crisis, inflation started to increase, and there was a continuous discussion among central bankers whether this is transitory or persistent. And for a long period of time they were arguing that, oh, don't worry, this is transitory, it would disappear. After a long time they came to the conclusion that the inflation surge has structural roots, and central banks needed to intervene, and they did this with a delay. But when they started to provide central bank responses, then the old logic could work again. Interest rates could go up. They needed to tighten monetary conditions. They had to increase their interest rates, and that was a room for doing this. And this rate increase policies could be accompanied by the opposite, the reverse of the asset purchase program, an asset sale program. So they could start to sell their bonds from their portfolio. They could either sell their securities before maturity, that was active quantitative tightening, or wait until maturity and not investing the proceeds of the expiring securities, that was passive quantitative tightening, and the combination of the two could be employed. Quantitative tightening does exactly the opposite what quantitative easing did. Quantitative tightening represents an additional supply of securities on the market and brings their prices down and brings their yields up. And that way it helps tightening the monetary conditions. Central banks should do this in a very careful way. Because imagine somebody, an institution, sitting on a big bond portfolio and seeing the portfolio melting as prices drop. So their wealth would decline a lot, and that could persuade them to get rid of their portfolio as soon as possible before their prices drop even further. And this fire sale could bring yields radically up and could represent a threat on economic activity and could lead to a recession at the end of the day. So this requires a very careful, predictable, cautious program of sales of government securities from the central bank portfolio. The selling of those bonds brings central bank balance sheet down, and one could interpret this as building a capacity for a future quantitative easing again. So if there is another crisis coming, then there's a room for increasing the balance sheet again. And now you can see on the chart, on the left-hand side chart, there's a net sale of securities the last couple of years. Also on the right-hand side, you can see the drop of the balance sheet this last couple of years. So this chart shows you the same again. Now let me turn to the second instrument of unconventional monetary policy forward guidance. Let me say that the main purpose of interest rate policy is guiding expectations. A 25 basis point change of an interest rate would not change the world. It would not radically change the lending conditions or borrowing conditions. The main meaning of an interest rate change is guiding expectations, telling the public that we, central bank, we are committed to the price stability, and this message, if this message is heard, then the public would react with their moving their expectations. Uh, I mentioned that there was a fear from uh, future interest rate increases, and because of the risks, there was high yield expectations in the public. And if in this context the central bank tells the public that don't worry, interest rate would remain low for a long period of time, and if the public accepts these words and they would modify their own expectations, then yields could come down from a higher risk evaluation to a lower risk evaluation, and that would the yield expectations would adjust, and that would help to reach the central bank objective. So forward guidance literally means that an announcement of the central bank intentions of interest rate policy in the future. The success criterion of this instrument is the same as with the asset purchase program. Could it contribute to a yield drop or not? It is very difficult to evaluate the impact of both the asset purchase program and the forward guidance on yields, because yields are an end result of many simultaneous factors working at the same time. So it is hard to separate the contribution of each factor to the end result. Only sophisticated mathematical models, econometric models can do this. But there is a very easy instrument to be used to separate the impact of forward guidance. This is what we call the event study. When we watch the immediate yield movements after the announcement of a forward guidance message by the central bank. And the idea is that yes, there are simultaneous factors working at the same time, but there is a high probability that in one single day there are no other new information to the market beside the forward guidance announcement. The assumption is that this is the only information the market gets, and the yield results reflect this, the response of the market to this information. And from this table you can see the responses. If you look at the table from horizontally, these are the yields of the American treasury bills and bonds, and you can see horizontally that the market reaction is more intensive on the longer maturities than the shorter maturities. And if you look at vertically, you can see the diminishing return. There are less and less reaction in time as based on forward guidance announcement. Forward guidance announcements are made usually in the statement following the FOMC meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee meeting, and this event study watches the market reaction to the announcement of this FOMC meeting. And you can see here the average in from 2012 to 2014, and here 2008 and 2022, and the forward guidance average is much higher at the earlier stage and then later. And also you can compare the market reactions on meetings with the forward guidance and without the forward guidance, and you see non-forward guidance average is much lower than the forward guidance average. So there is a clear evidence that forward guidance did contribute to a yield drop. as I said, forward guidance serves the same goal as interest rate policy, guiding expectations. Therefore, I personally tend to treat forward guidance as a separate tool of monetary policy. Forward guidance is a kind of a substitute of monetary policy. Sometimes it is cheaper and less painful than an interest rate rise. An interest rate rise makes the burden of borrowers heavier. The monthly repayment of a loan becomes more painful if the interest rate goes up. But with the forward guidance, you may manage to reach the same thing, the same result as with an interest rate increase. Instead of a 25 basis point rate increase, the central bank may say, don't worry, interest rates would remain low. This may help changing the expectations, and then you don't have to raise the interest rates at all. It is a substitute for interest rate policy, but not forever, because there is an absolute need for consistency between words and actions. So you cannot simply use words as monetary policy and not use interest rate at all. The consistency is necessary on the long run, but not necessarily on the short run. Let me emphasize some ambiguity regarding forward guidance. When there is an announcement from the central bank that interest rate would remain low, this is a big question how market participants here translate this message. Do they say that this statement tells me that the central bank is absolutely pessimistic regarding the future, and because of the poor prospects of the future, they need to keep interest rates low. But if the future is that dark, my yield expectations, my pessimism would not change, so my current high yield expectation I would keep it unchanged. But there is another reading of the situation, of the announcement. The other reading of the announcement is this. The central bank knows that the things would normalize soon, and it tells me that it would not change the low interest rates despite the economic recovery. In other words, it tells me that it would break with inflation targeting logic for some time. It would put aside inflation targeting for some time in order to maintain low interest rates. So therefore, it is a crucial question for central banks to convince the market players about the proper reading of the announcement. The second point I want to make here is a kind of a trap. The forward guidance may represent a trap for a central bank. Central bank commits itself with a continuous low interest rate environment for some time, but in the meantime, inflation starts to increase. Then what to do? One option is that say, I don't change my words. I keep interest rates low, but in that case, high inflation would prevail. This works against the mandate of the central bank. That's a poor consequence. The other option is that if there is an inflation surge in the meantime, the central bank say, okay, things changed a lot, so therefore I adjust myself to the change, and I change my words, and I do what I have to do in order to prevent high inflation. This undermines credibility. It would say, if you said this to me yesterday and you change your words, what would happen tomorrow? I won't believe you anymore. So this is a a bad trap for the central bank. And finally, uh, um, I would say that asset purchase programs uh, are not uh, 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 necessary and not desirable anymore, especially when the macroeconomic situation has normalized. One could ask if I am right, and the asset purchase program represents a violation of the monetary financing prohibition, why should we tolerate this in a crisis time? And my response to this is because the house is in fire, and if the house is in fire, you have to kill the fire at any price. But once the fire is gone, then you have to return to the normal routine and employ monetary financing prohibition again. As far as forward guidance is concerned, one could argue that it produced very good results. It helped to guide expectations. Why shouldn't we use it on a regular basis? If I am right, and forward guidance is a new monetary policy instrument, we should use it on a continuous basis. Yes, this is true under relatively predictable circumstances. But these days, future is very much uncertain. Many countries were able to bring inflation down. My country had 25% inflation a year ago, and inflation is at 5% these days. So there was a very radical inflation drop these last few months. But we don't know what the future will bring. The future is very much uncertain. The European Central Bank leaders argue that we make decisions by meeting, or the other central bankers say that our interest rate decisions are data-driven. In other words, they do not know what the future will bring. And if there is this uncertainty regarding the future, forward guidance cannot be used, because forward guidance represents a commitment. But central banks cannot commit themselves to any interest rate movement in the future, because they do not know the future. On the other hand, circumstances may change. A crisis can occur again. So even if I argue today that asset purchase programs and forward guidance should not be used, I cannot claim that they cannot be used in the future. Never say never. So thank you for your attention, and I would be glad to answer your questions, either regarding this topic or regarding general topic from my country, if you are interested.
Thank you so much, Professor, for a very incisive, balanced, and indeed very sensitive insights into the nuances of unconventional monetary policy, especially from the perspective of central banks and the integrity of central banks and their communication. So we are indeed very grateful. There are lots of questions over here, but I guess at the beginning we will open the session out to the audience, and we will take.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. I actually wanted to know if such signaling methods can work in demographically disadvantaged countries like Italy or Japan.
Say it again.
I wanted to know whether such signaling methods like APP will work in demographically disadvantaged countries like Japan and Italy and other places.
I'm not sure I can answer this. Um, Demographically disadvantaged countries, meaning, as far as I understand, uh, getting
Older, yes.
older people. This is probably this is the the presence of every country in the world. In my country, this is very much the situation, but I don't think that demographic aspects are that much linked to this central bank policies. Um, uh, I don't see a direct link between the two.
Usually the people drive up the demand, so how would that affect it?
Usually, people.
Usually people are the ones who drive demands in the market, so how would, having a disadvantaged demographic actually impact that?
In some sense, yes, I can now. I can think a bit more about this, and I can see that there is um, a structural difference between older demand, poorer household demand, and wealthier demand. Um, in Hungary, we have a consumer price index, a general consumer price index, and there is a special consumer price index for retired people, because the consumption structure of the retired people is obviously different from the active labor force structure. Higher spendings on medicine, more spendings on food, and less spending on travel and cars. And I think, to my recollection, the consumer price index for retired people is at least 1 percentage point higher than the general price index. So the older people are more directly affected by higher inflation. So therefore, one can argue that demographically disadvantaged countries should be more sensitive to the inflation issue.
Thank you.
There was an IMF report which was, I think, released last year, which said that during COVID, countries that actually practiced targeted asset purchase showed, showed great success when it came to managing their inflation levels. And in a time when there's a pandemic, when uncertainty in general is high, you can't really follow a forward guidance program, because the uncertainty associated with the forward guidance program, like you said, is high. So if central banks can't maintain it, then a targeted asset purchase program would be better in that situation, right?
Um, you mean targeted asset programs for specific assets, or?
Yeah, for specific kinds of assets. So
Um, I am not that much familiar with the specific programs, but I do know that some countries fully rejected assets from a private sector, uh, claiming that central banks are not supposed to run any market risk or third-party risk, and should focus only on government papers. And also within the government papers, they should focus more on long-term maturities, because their focus should be on long yields, not on short yields, because long yields represent the actual capital cost, and what they want to reach is the reduction of the capital cost.
Yeah, my query is that see, we admit at the upfront that future is uncertain. We're continuously in fact, I would go one step ahead and say we are not in an ordinary uncertainty, but the kind of Knightian uncertainty which Keynes talked about. But at the same time, the central banks, when framing practical policies, go back and look at theoretical models which are based on very hazy and opaque concepts like expectations, without even bothering to figure how the expectations result in action.
Well, expectation is a is a very valuable but also very difficult notion because it is not observable. Um, so we claim that expectations change this way or that way, but we are not entirely sure how to measure it because you cannot observe it. Um, um, so I think central banks rely very much on surveys. People are asked about their feeling of inflation right now and what they think the inflation will be in the future. And the surveys are very far from reality. Uh, uh, I remember in Hungary at least the difference is 2 times. So when inflation is 5, people think that it is 10. And the future is even worse. But there are, I'm not an expert of mathematical techniques, but there are very sophisticated techniques to discount and to transform expectations on actual numbers. And they say that we are not interested in the levels, but we are interested in the trends, in the movements. If people think inflation is 10, in reality it is 5, but last year they were thinking it was 12, today they think it is 10, then the expectation is improving. So the dynamics of surveys is important, and also that there are indirect indications for expectations, such as wages. Uh, Wage earners are claiming that I want to protect my purchasing power, and if wage earners feel that inflation is growing, they would obviously require higher wage increase. So the wage increase demands reflect what the people think about the future inflation. So this is also an indication for central bankers. But I agree that this is uncertain. Expectation, the term is not that much certain.
Professor Peter, this is in continuation with what Mr. Ramgopal said, that when once I think must have heard the Fed Reserve Chairman saying that we know now little better, that we understand the inflation least. What do I mean that? So we don't know much about inflation, but we're trying to look at it is driving the expectations. Rather, the expectations driving the inflation. So what is your comment on which drives what? Is it the inflation actually drives the expectations, or the expectation drives the inflation?
Both, yes. This is a mutual, yeah, that's a mutual link. Uh, we often say that expectations are self-fulfilling prophecies. If many think the same way, that this would become a reality. If people think that inflation will increase, they would bring their purchases forward. They would want to prevent higher prices, and they would do their purchases today. And if everyone thinks the same way, that would represent a sudden increase of demand, pushing prices up, and then reality is what people were thinking. On the other hand, we know from empirical studies that the expectations reflect inflation, and and often we say that and expectations are backward looking. People are expecting what inflation was a year ago, and central bankers try to tell people forget about the past, look forward, and I try to tell you that the future is rosy, inflation will drop, and please modify your expectations accordingly.
That's what exactly we're trying to figure out. We'll send that paper. Actually, we're working on it. In fact, it's a little bit different from conservative thinking of that inflation actually drives expectations. Therefore, when you are trying to anchor expectation, then you can control inflation. That's actually the idea that most of central banks communicate. to the markets. But of course, we are trying to look at from the other side, the back side, to see that actually expectations will expectations tax matters actually for inflation rates. So of course, we'll be sharing that paper with you too, for your comments.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, the question was related to this dual mandate and the hierarchical mandate. So ECB, this Eurozone area, has the price stability as just a single mandate, which the central bank is following. But in India, it is price stability and growth. So what kind of impact it has on this, the conventional and monetary policy transmission also, and the conventional and the unconventional operation?
Uh, say it again.
I'm asking the question related to the mandate. So in case of euro area, it is price stability only, and in India it is growth and plus price stability. So what impact it has on the monetary policy operations when it is conducting? That is what my question is.
Yes. So your question relates a very huge issue, and so price stability and growth, and I could add another dimension, financial stability, because I could open a discussion on the mandate of the central bank, which says that the primary objective of the central bank is price stability, and only if price stability is not put in danger, central bank should support government policies and growth, and also financial stability. So financial stability and growth in our Central Bank Act in Hungary, or every other objective is subordinated to the price stability objective. But in reality, growth and price stability can go hand in hand in many cases. They would require the same central bank response in many cases, but in some cases they are in conflict with each other. And if there is a conflict, central bank should give priority to price stability. That's fine. But what to do in the case of financial stability? Financial stability is put in the wording of the Central Bank Act in our country, the same level of growth, subordinated to price stability. In most of the cases, these two, price stability and financial stability, go hand in hand, but in some cases they may be in conflict with each other. If there is a conflict, what should enjoy priority? In my personal reading, I would say financial stability should get priority because it is the basis of everything. If there is no price stability, the system can still work. If there is no price stability, let's say this is 2% inflation. If inflation is not 2 but 4, the economy can run smoothly. It's not a good thing because on the long run, you may have a lower GDP growth rate as if you had 2% inflation, but still your economy could run. But if there is no financial stability, your economy would collapse. So financial stability, in my reading of the situation, is should enjoy absolute priority. But in the wording of the Central Bank Act, it is not formulated that way.
Yes, sir. Absolutely right, sir. And one more question was this: when there is a unanticipated, unconventional monetary policy shock, it has an impact on the inflation expectations. So, what kind of impact it has in the short run and in the long run?
It's, I don't think you can answer this in a simple way. Uh, 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 Let me say this: uh, uh, there's an issue. If there's a shock, there's an inflation shock. should the central bank respond to this shock or not? The argument of not responding is that the shock would disappear, the impact would fade away. If there is a shock on the energy market, then the fuel price would increase suddenly and dramatically, and inflation would increase as well. Should the central bank respond to this, then one possible answer that it is not necessary because this energy shock would disappear, and a year later the inflation would come back to the earlier rate. But what happens if the expectations change? If as a result of the higher fuel price at the gas station, people would say, "Ooh, inflation is that high, so I would fear that it would remain so, and I change my expectations." And if the central bank can monitor this and can measure this expectation change, then it would become necessary to make a policy response. But on the long run, I am not sure what would be the consequence on the very long run.
Sir, I have a relatively simple question. Say the central bank is indulging in quantitative easing. It is printing money and is buying bonds and supplying the money into the economy. Now, in this operation, the balance sheet should increase, and this increase, is it permanent?
By
Is it permanent, the increase in balance sheet? And if it is, it should increase the responsibility of the central bank as well. Is it the case, I'm asking?
yes, if the money pumped in
Yes, sir.
stays there,
Yes.
then the balance sheet increase is permanent.
Yes.
Um, and
If it is permanent, then it should increase the responsibility of the central bank as well, managing the increased balance sheet.
that's true, but
I-
my comment. Let me see this from a different angle. My angle is that if a money supply is increased on a permanent way, it represents an inflationary threat. And the question why this huge money supply increase did not produce inflation in 2007 and 8 or in the COVID time, and this is because this increased money did not add to the aggregate demand. The money increased, was not spent, but stayed unused, and simply increased the central bank reserves. So money supply, the assets of the central bank increase on the one hand, and the liability of the central bank increase simultaneously on the other hand, because the injected money increased the reserves, central bank reserves. The commercial banks did not use this money for lending purposes, but put this money on on their central bank accounts, or started yield hunting globally, and brought this money to emerging economies. I don't know if in India got this a lot or not, but as I mentioned in my speech, Hungary did enjoy a lot of this money inflow. So my concern for the balance sheet increase is the impact on inflation, and my reading of the situation is that the 2020, 21, 22 inflation surge was a result of the quantitative easing made during the crisis time. So this is a delayed impact. Inflation consequence is there, but not immediately, but with a delay. Yeah. Because of the time constraint, I just mentioned this very briefly, that yes, it did. What happened was that the injected money was not used for real economic purposes, for lending activity, household consumption, but was used for financial investments, financial investments on the securities market, on the stock market, on the real estate market, and there is a well-funded fear that bubbles are being built on those markets, and some argues that the stock markets are badly overvalued, and the collapse can come any time.
I think the questions will go on and on. There's a whole range of questions which are there, but we are constrained on time. And and to Professor, we are really very grateful to you for being here and carrying forward the tradition of Hungarian economists in Pune. And very grateful to you for the insights into unconventional monetary. It's an area we are not too familiar with, and we are very grateful for your insights in this matter. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.